You don't sound terrible. You sound like the recordings. The school I went to is Manhattan School of Music, or we call it MSM for short. So I guess the definition is just someone who influences, someone who has sway.
On the red couch today, we have the young and talented Barbadian opera singer and influencer, Shantal Martin. So welcome to the red couch, Shantal. It's lovely to have you here in person.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
She is excited. I am excited to have her here because I've seen you, watch you grow up over the last decade or so, attended and emceed a couple of your concerts at our church, St. Patrick's Cathedral. Yeah, and I remember you're being backed by the what was then the Royal Barbados Police Band, now the Barbados Police Service Band. You know, what a wonderful experience. You had Prime Minister attending and that sort of stuff and so on. So you really have come a long way. And of course, you went off to the US. So let's pick up the story from going off to the US and finding out what that journey was like.
Okay, so I did have a couple concerts here on the island. A lot of them were supposed to be for raising funds for school, because I went to school in the US. I went to a conservatory. It's called the Manhattan School of Music. We're one of the top conservatories in the world. I'm very proud to say that. And so I went there for both my bachelor's and my master's. So I have a bachelor's in music and then a master's in classical voice. I primarily studied opera while I was at school. It was lots of theater. We got introduced to a lot of different types of music, different genres. I would have performed and played and been directed by like tops in the, I guess, business is what you would call them. I've worked with the New York Phil. I've worked with conductors and directors from the Met Opera and operas in Europe. Yeah, and I've been the lead in all of the plays that I've been in. So it's been a good time.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So, but I gotta ask you this question before we get deeper into that. So, as a young person growing up, you were growing up in the age of Buju Bantam, Burna Boy, and you know, Machel and Skinny Fabulous and so on, and you're singing opera. How did that happen? Where was your? Because with your voice and your talent, you could sing Do Re Mi Fa Sol La Ti Do and make it sound wonderful. So where did this all come together?
So actually, my grandmother, she had a neighbor, and she would be playing, I guess, records, old operatic records, and I would be listening through the fence. And one day she like caught me listening through the fence, so she invited me over. And when I got into the apartment, she was like, "Do you know this music?" And I was like, "I don't, but I've been listening to it." So she like kind of left me to my own devices in the living room, like listening. And I started singing along. And she was like, "This is strange because you don't sound terrible. You sound like the recordings." And obviously I was really young. I think I was probably around 6 or 7. At that time, I was mostly doing dance in that space. So to add the music to it, I think it was a bit of a shock for everyone because at that age, I wasn't really that outspoken. I would always be like in a corner reading a book, and then you'd only see me when I'm dancing. So when she heard me sing, she was so shocked that she like called my grandmother over, and then they became obsessed with like finding me voice teachers and making me sing, basically.
Tell me a little bit about your life as a child growing up. What was childhood like? I got a glimpse into it from your grandmother. So obviously your grandmother was a big influence on your life, and her next door neighbor, now passed, was profoundly influential. But tell me a little bit about your home life growing up and so on.
I was always just a very busy kid. I had 1,000,001 after school activities. I think it was more so, my dad he's an architect, but he's also a badminton umpire and used to be a badminton player. Now he's an international umpire, so he umpires for like the Olympics and all those things.
Really?
Yeah. And yeah, so he's always traveling. His next trip is to Singapore. But because he was doing badminton, it was like, okay, I also have to do it. So I picked that up. And then I wanted to dance. My mother wanted me to study ballet, so picked that up. And then started swimming, so I was doing that. And I had music from a young age, so I was doing music from primary school, and it was theory. It wasn't anything practical at that point, it was just musical theory, and it was through one of my musical mentors, Mr. Whitehall. He played tuba in the Barbados Police Force Band. And so I had no time to do anything but my activities. And I liked it. I think it really shaped me as a person, but now I always like being busy.
Tell me a little bit about this school in New York and what was the process of getting into that?
Okay, so the school I went to is Manhattan School of Music, or we call it MSM for short. Basically,
almost MSNBC.
Almost. I think my dad for years would confuse the two, and he would be typing MSN instead of MSM for years, and I'd be so confused. But basically what happened was in my last year at Commermere, around the time that I had to do graduation, I had auditioned for a summer program that was run by the school. And basically for the classical musician space, a lot of the experience we get is from those types of programs. So I went up to New York and I was studying with a couple of the teachers that already teach on the faculty at the school. And we were doing productions, we did musical theater, I think that was my first introduction to Sondheim, who's just everything to me. We did Into the Woods, and then we did a couple operas at the same time. And from that, the teacher I was studying with, his name was Neil Rosenshine. He was an American tenor, is an American tenor. He's not singing currently, but he was very prominent in his younger age. Very good, amazing, such a good singer, such a good teacher, very kind. And so at the end of my summer, he was like, hey, well, you're about to go out to Barbados, but what do you think? You should audition for this school. And at that time, I was trying to decide between MSM, Juilliard, New England Conservatory. There were a bunch of different ones that I was...
All great, I'm sure.
All great, except for Juilliard. All great. And we have this big portal. Yeah, sotto voce, except for Juilliard. So I ended up auditioning for all of them and getting into majority of them. And it really and truly came down to the feel of the school. So I decided to go to MSM, and it was really good. I met a lot of lifelong friends there that I'm still best friends with and I talk to every day. It was a very interesting space to be in as the only West Indian in the entire school, outside of janitorial staff. It was just me. And I think I entered with 3 or 4 other Black students. It was just me left. So,
wow.
Yeah. Harrowing. Music school is not easy. It takes a toll.
And how many years you spent?
I did 6 years in total. 4 years bachelor's, 2 years master's.
Tell me about this, a little bit more about your career and your professional life as an influencer.
Right, so...
And how do you define, give me the definition of influencer and then relate to me how you've made a living out of this.
So I guess the definition is just someone who influences, someone who has sway, someone who has a trusted opinion is what I would say an influencer is. Okay. So it could be anybody. So I fought the term influencer for a very long time. I think I fought it because Bajans are very much who are you influencing? That's silly, don't call yourself that. But while I was in New York, I would usually say, oh, hi, I'm Shantal, I'm an opera singer. And I would have a friend of mine who I met in the industry, she'd be like, no, you're an influencer. And I felt like uncomfortable using that term because it felt like, I don't know, it felt like if I was giving myself too much credit for things. So it was a confusing space to be in at that point, but I've gotten more accustomed to using the term. I think I started the journey very early. A lot of us did, but I started it like on Facebook. I would make things. I was always very crafty, and then I would post them. So then people would comment on them and be like, oh, you should make this, or oh, you should do that. So it was just very much like building an online community in the first go. That was Facebook. Transferred over to Snapchat. On Snapchat, I would do like makeup tutorials. And then as Instagram came over, I started putting more of the makeup tutorials onto Instagram. And I became obsessed, not obsessed, but I found a love of beauty while I was in New York. My mother's an esthetician, and before that she was a makeup artist, and I fought makeup hard. I was like, I don't want this. I'm a tomboy. I don't want makeup. It's gross. And so it was a very big shift for her as well. But what happened was, being that I was in school and being that I was in productions, and I was the only Black person on a lot of these like shows, there's nobody to do my makeup. I had to figure it out for myself. So as I was figuring it out for myself, it became, I guess, kind of an escape from the stresses of school. But then as I started going to more events, everything is very social with that job. You're like it's a constant performance. So it stopped being an escape. It just became another performance at that point. I would go to a lot of events, be invited by brands to meet people. Eventually I got signed to an agency because influencing became a $1 billion industry. And we as influencers now have shifted the way that advertising happens and just communication to direct audiences happen. And so I switched to my agency, and then it was like, floodgates opened. It was like a whole new world opened up, and it opened up in a time where I felt like everything was slipping. So I really grabbed onto it, and it really flourished in that time, which would have been the COVID time, because no one had anything to do besides sit at home and look at their phones. So we became everyone else's escape. And by doing that, then we also became cash cows, basically. And so it was a very interesting foray. And I would always say, because now that I have all these experiences in influencing, and I look at my mother, she's been doing this. She would travel with all these brands to go like learn how to put their makeup on. She would have all these trips. She would get all this free stuff. I was like, you've been doing this job, and I had no idea. And now I'm just doing it in a cycle. Like, now I'm doing it, and that's so strange to me.
Thank you very much for being my guest here on the Red Couch.
Thank you for having me.
We wish you all success. I suspect that you are well on your way on your journey, and we will continue to watch in awe and hope that you will come back and be our guest on a future occasion.
Of course.
Shantal Martin, thank you very much.